Imagine a time when one man, a distant European monarch, could claim an entire subcontinent, a territory of unparalleled vastness and untold riches, as his own personal property. This is not a fable, but the chilling truth behind the rise of the Congo Free State and the reign of King Leopold II of Belgium, a chapter of history so dark its atrocities are often compared to the destruction wrought during the Holocaust. How did a seemingly benevolent king preside over one of the most brutal colonial regimes ever documented? The answer lies in a confluence of ambition, technology, and a global hunger for a single revolutionary material. The foundation of this empire began subtly, far from the gaze of competing European powers. Between 1885 and 1908, Leopold II exercised absolute, unchecked rule over an immense region in sub-Saharan Africa. At the time, this area was largely unexplored and unclaimed by other European nations, whose influence rarely extended beyond the coastlines. Leopold named his acquisition the Congo Free State, a title that would soon be exposed as a cruel deception, a mask for unimaginable bondage and exploitation. The local population was anything but free. To understand this colossal seizure of land, we must go back to 1879, the year the king dispatched the famed explorer and journalist Henry Morton Stanley to the region. Stanley, much like his royal patron, saw immense, untapped economic potential waiting in the dense jungles of Central Africa. Stanley's initial mandate was shrouded in a cloak of humanitarianism, operating under the guise of the King's Holding Company, which claimed to be devoted to promoting free trade and stamping out the existing Arab slave trade. Stanley began his relentless march. He was tasked with surveying the vast Congo River basin, a watery highway essential for penetrating the interior. Along this massive river and its navigable tributaries, he meticulously established crucial trading outposts and erected fortified military posts. He built vital infrastructure, roads and bridges, but his most significant and insidious accomplishment was the crafting of treaties. Stanley convinced over 500 Congolese chieftains to affix their marks to documents written in a language they could not read, unwittingly surrendering their ancestral lands and sovereignty to the Congo Association. What did they receive for signing away the future of their people? A few cheap trinkets, small bags of salt, and lengths of cloth? A devastating and unequal trade that sealed their fate. The king, a master of subtle diplomacy, waited for the perfect political moment to formalize his claim, which arrived with the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885. This was the peak of the scramble for Africa, a fierce, frenzied competition where major European powers were rushing to carve up the continent, fueled by national pride and industrial greed. Through skillful maneuvering and quiet political pressure, Leopold secured international recognition for his possession of the entire Congo River basin. It was then that he officially renamed the territory the Congo Free State, making himself the absolute and unchallenged sovereign of an area nearly 80 times the size of Belgium. But how could such a small number of Europeans hope to control a territory so vast, populated by 20 million people? The answer lay in a critical technological shift, a moment that handed the king the tools of modern domination that had been unavailable to earlier colonists. These innovations allowed a few thousand agents to impose their will on the masses. The first was weaponry. Primitive muzzle loaders were rapidly replaced by superior, more lethal weapons like the breech-loading rifles, such as the Albini. These rifles shot further, were significantly more accurate, and crucially, utilized quick-loading, waterproof brass cartridges. Resistance was met with devastating force. The Congolese forces were armed only with traditional bows, spears, and outdated muskets, making any confrontation virtually suicidal. The second indispensable tool was a breakthrough in medical science. The tropical environment and its diseases had long been the biggest killer of Europeans in Africa, resulting in very high mortality rates. However, around 1900, medical understanding improved dramatically. Europeans discovered the efficacy of quinine as a powerful defense against malaria. Furthermore, debilitating diseases like hematuria and yellow fever were better understood and treatable. The death rates among Leopold's agents dropped significantly, stabilizing the European presence and cementing their ability to remain in the interior. The final essential piece of the puzzle was the paddle steamboat. The Congo's unique sprawling topography made river travel the only viable option for transport and logistics. These steamboats made the long journey from Europe faster and easier, allowing a fixed, reliable travel schedule. More importantly, they became the vessels that continuously carried waves of Leopold's agents, mercenaries, and supplies deep into the heart of Africa, enabling true control over the vast interior. But for all the talk of suppressing slavery, it was a sudden, ravenous global market demand that transformed the Congo into a hellscape of forced labor. Ironically, Leopold's justification for intervention, the suppression of slavery, was completely ignored when he discovered a new source of wealth. By the final decade of the 19th century, two parallel developments exploded the demand for rubber. John Boyd Dunlop's 1887 invention of the inflatable rubber bicycle inner tube and the meteoric rise of the automobile. This rubber boom was a godsend for the king, who desperately needed to pay off the massive debts incurred by his investments. Because rubber could be harvested faster from trees than from vines, there was immense pressure to maximize output. To ensure this maximum extraction, Leopold instituted a ruthless labor system that, in all but name, enslaved the indigenous population. This brutal economic policy is remembered by critics as the Red Rubber System, a somber reference to the immense quantities of African blood spilled for the king's profit. The methods of enforcement were systematic and savage. Agents would rob the natives of their essential resources, seizing livestock and grain supplies. They would launch attacks and take women and children as hostages. The fate of these hostages was tied directly to the rubber quota. If the district chieftain presented the required amount of rubber, the women and children might be sold back to their families for a few goats apiece. Refusal to work could result in the death of one's wife. If an entire settlement resisted the demands of the rubber companies, a detachment of soldiers from the Force Publique, Leopold's private military, would be sent to wipe out the village and kill any resident foolish enough not to flee. The workers were thus compelled to extract rubber with minimal cost and under unthinkable conditions, enforced by agents who relied on forced labor and slave labor to meet impossible quotas. The Force Publique, formally united in 1885, existed primarily to maintain a brutal form of law and order in the Congo Free State. These soldiers were tasked with enforcing the rubber quotas, armed not only with modern weapons, but also with the infamous chicotte. This was a savage bullwhip made of dried hippopotamus hide, used to mercilessly beat the natives for any minor transgression or simply for the sadistic pleasure of the guards. Yet, even beatings and abductions pale in comparison to the most notorious form of punishment implemented by the Force Publique, the mutilation of the body. Soldiers would often cut off the right hands of natives who refused to work or failed to meet their impossible output targets. While some victims survived this brutal amputation, many succumbed to infection and gangrene. But why the hands? The logic was rooted in colonial economics. Since ammunition was expensive, imported from Europe, every single bullet had to be accounted for. If a soldier shot a native, he was required to cut off the victim's right hand to prove that the bullet hadn't been wasted on hunting wildlife for food or sport. Or worse, stockpiled for a potential mutiny. The hands, therefore, became a gruesome form of currency and verification. If a villager attempted to flee the horrors, the soldiers would retaliate by rounding up the entire family and systematically amputating their hands or feet. and sometimes even their noses and ears. While the most famous accounts involve hands, these mutilations were also performed on other body parts, sometimes on living people, but often on those already killed in massacres. Survivors recounted horrifying tales of pretending to be dead, lying motionless while the soldiers hacked off the hands, only daring to move for help once the patrol had moved on. In a final act of institutionalized terror, soldiers could actually reduce the length of their service with the Force Publique by bringing extra severed hands to present to the European post commanders, a policy that created a grotesque incentive for more unnecessary murder and mutilation. The hands became the de facto resource the guards harvested, instead of the rubber itself. The depravity extended to the highest levels of the local administration. Captain Léon Rome, a notorious soldier who served as the main administrator at a heavily fortified trading station at Stanley Falls, reportedly used the severed heads of at least 21 Congolese men as a bizarre and chilling border decoration around the flower beds in front of his house. Though the display of skulls had some cultural precedent in Central African society at the time, this public official act by a European agent symbolized the complete savagery of the colonial regime. Other reports detailed soldiers tying 10 villagers inside a fishing net, weighing it down with rocks, and deliberately dragging them into the river to drown. It is reported that even King Leopold, far away in Brussels, supposedly frowned upon the practice of cutting off hands, not on humanitarian grounds, but because it was counterproductive to the labor force. He is famously quoted as shouting, "Cut off everything else but not their hands. The one thing I need in the Congo is hands." What was the final cost of this ambition? The exact death toll is tragically unknown, a number lost to the chaos and brutality of the time, but the population loss was truly catastrophic. Historians point to 4 primary, interconnected causes. First, the wholesale genocide and massacre of the natives. Second, widespread death from starvation, exhaustion, and exposure due to forced labor. Third, diseases, both endemic ones like the sleeping sickness outbreak caused by the tsetse fly, and those introduced by the Europeans, such as various venereal diseases and smallpox. And finally, a devastating falling birth rate relative to a rapidly declining population. E.D. Morel, one of the most important figures in exposing these atrocities to the world, estimated the Congo Free State consisted of approximately 20 million people before King Leopold II took control. Mark Twain, a prominent writer who condemned the horrors, cited a death toll of 10 million. This approximation, that half the population was wiped out during this period, suggests the death count resulting from Leopold's atrocities in the Congo is unequivocally in the millions. It remains one of history's most compelling and somber lessons on the perils of unchecked economic power and colonial brutality. This powerful, animated account of history is driven by the desire to make the past engaging and unforgettable, and is built upon the rigorous research of respected historians whose references are provided on screen. We encourage you to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and share it widely to ensure this story is never forgotten. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can join us for our next journey into the crucial chapters of world history.